My daughter-in-law stole my husband. Then she sent me a wedding invitation. Come see what a young woman can do to a man. She expected to see me in tears. When the priest asked, "Does anyone object?" I smiled, adjusted my dress, and said 3 words that left everyone pale. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The ivory envelope sitting on my kitchen counter looked innocent enough, but the moment I saw Chloe's perfect handwriting, my stomach twisted into knots. 65 years old, and I still felt like that naive young woman who'd once trusted too easily. I opened it with trembling fingers, already knowing what I'd find but hoping I was wrong. The wedding invitation was elegant, expensive, everything Chloe had always aspired to be. Donald Michael Harrison and Chloe Marie Stevens request the honor of your presence. My ex-husband's name stared back at me in golden script. Below it, in Chloe's delicate handwriting, was a personal note that made my blood run cold. Catherine, I hope you'll come see what a young woman can do with a man who truly appreciates her. Your presence would mean the world to us both. The cruelty was breathtaking. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a declaration of victory. I sank into my chair, the paper fluttering to the floor as memories crashed over me like a tidal wave. 2 years ago, when I'd fallen down those basement stairs and broken my hip, Donald had been so concerned, so attentive. We need help, Catherine, he'd said, holding my hand in the hospital. Just until you're back on your feet. Chloe had appeared like an angel of mercy. 28 years old, blonde hair always perfectly styled, with the kind of smile that fooled everyone. She'd introduced herself as a certified nursing assistant, came with glowing references, and charged rates so reasonable I should have been suspicious. I just love helping people, she'd said that first day, arranging my medications with such care. Especially someone as sweet as you, Mrs. Harrison. Your husband speaks about you so lovingly. What a fool I'd been. While I lay recovering in that hospital bed, then later confined to the upstairs bedroom, Chloe had been downstairs playing house with my husband of 37 years. She cooked his favorite meals I'd taught her to make during those early weeks when I still thought she was there to help me. She listened to his stories about the insurance business, laughed at his jokes, and slowly, methodically, turned him against me. Catherine's been different since the accident. I'd overheard Donald telling his brother on the phone. Chloe thinks it might be early dementia. The way she gets confused, says things that don't make sense. But I wasn't confused. I was being gaslit by a master manipulator who knew exactly how to make me doubt my own reality. When I complained about money missing from my purse, Chloe would find it in strange places, the refrigerator, my jewelry box, and suggest gently that perhaps my memory wasn't quite right. When I accused her of encouraging Donald to spend more time with her than with me, she'd produce a detailed care schedule showing how devoted she was to my recovery. The divorce papers had arrived 6 months ago. Donald couldn't even face me himself. He'd had his lawyer deliver them along with a settlement offer that was insulting in its cruelty. Half of everything we'd built together, he claimed, should stay with him because I was no longer capable of managing financial responsibilities. I'd fought it, of course, hired the best lawyer I could afford with what little money I had access to. But Donald had already transferred so much into accounts I couldn't touch, claiming it was for Catherine's medical expenses and future care needs. The judge had been sympathetic, but ultimately ruled that Donald's documented concerns about my mental state, supported by Chloe's professional observations, warranted the current arrangement. Now, I lived in this small apartment, surviving on a fraction of what should have been mine, while Donald and his young bride-to-be planned their future in the house I'd decorated, on money I'd helped earn. The worst part wasn't the financial devastation, it was the isolation. Our daughter Lisa lived in Seattle and believed everything Donald told her about my declining mental state. Our son Mark had been deployed overseas when everything fell apart and only knew the version of events Donald chose to share. Even my sister Joan had grown distant, probably thinking I was just a bitter old woman who couldn't accept that her marriage had run its course. I picked up the invitation from the floor, studying Chloe's smug message again. She expected me to stay home, to hide in shame while she celebrated her victory. She probably imagined me crying into a bottle of wine, consumed by jealousy and regret. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: determination. I walked to my closet and pulled out the navy blue dress I'd worn to my grandson's graduation last year. It still fit perfectly, still made me feel elegant and strong. I'd go to this wedding, all right. I'd hold my head high and show everyone that Catherine Harrison couldn't be broken so easily. But as I hung the dress back up, planning what I'd wear to watch my ex-husband marry his mistress, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that something about this whole situation didn't add up. Chloe's rapid transformation from caring nurse to devoted girlfriend had happened too smoothly, too perfectly. And Donald, for all his faults, had never been the type to throw away decades of marriage for a pretty face. There was more to this story. I could feel it in my bones, the same instinct that had kept me alive and thriving for 65 years. And maybe, just maybe, if I looked hard enough, I'd find the truth that would finally set me free. The wedding was still 2 weeks away, time enough to do some digging of my own. I hadn't expected the divorce papers to be so revealing, but sitting in my lawyer's office 3 days after receiving that wedding invitation, I was beginning to see patterns I'd missed before. "Mrs. Harrison," my attorney, Sarah Chen, said, spreading the financial documents across her mahogany desk, "I need you to look at these transactions again. Something here doesn't sit right with me." My hands shook slightly as I examined the bank statements. In the 6 months before Donald filed for divorce, there had been a series of transfers I'd never authorized. $20,000 to something called Specialized Home Care Services, $15,000 to medical equipment rental, another $12,000 to private nursing consultation. "I never saw any of this equipment," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And Chloe always said her services were being billed directly to our insurance." Sarah leaned forward, her expression grave. "Mrs. Harrison, according to your insurance company, they never received a single claim for home nursing services. Not one." The room seemed to tilt around me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your husband has been paying your nurse directly, in cash amounts that far exceed what any legitimate nursing service would charge. And these payments started before your accident." My mouth went dry. "Before?" Sarah pulled out another document. "This first payment to Chloe Stevens is dated 3 weeks before your fall. It's listed as Consultation for Elderly Care Planning." The implications hit me like a physical blow. They had been planning this, all of it. My accident, my recovery, my isolation. It had all been orchestrated. "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice gentle but determined. "I ran a background check on Chloe Stevens. Catherine, this woman isn't who she says she is." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a photograph of Chloe, but the name beneath it read, Chloe Marie Peterson. She's been married before. Twice, actually. Her first husband died in a car accident 2 years after their wedding, leaving her as the sole beneficiary of his life insurance policy, $200,000. Her second husband, an elderly gentleman named Robert Stevens, passed away last year from what was ruled natural causes. He left her everything: his house, his savings, his investment portfolio, nearly $500,000. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the papers. She kept his last name. Yes, and here's where it gets interesting. Both previous husbands had adult children who contested the wills. In both cases, Chloe provided extensive documentation of their father's declining mental states, supported by medical records showing confusion, memory loss, and decision-making impairment. The pattern was unmistakable. Chloe was a predator who specialized in elderly men with assets. She'd done this before, not once, but twice. "Sarah," I whispered. "Those medical records she had for her previous husbands, how detailed were they?" "Very detailed. Comprehensive documentation of cognitive decline, behavioral changes, even incidents of aggression and paranoia. The kind of records that would make any judge question the deceased's competency in their final years." My stomach churned as I realized what she was implying. She's been documenting Donald, too. Sarah nodded grimly. I think so. And Catherine, I think she's been documenting you as well. All those times she claimed you were confused. When money went missing and turned up in strange places, she was building a case. Making you look unstable so that when Donald's time comes. I couldn't finish the thought. The idea that this young woman had targeted my husband, not for love, but for inheritance, that she'd systematically destroyed my marriage as part of a longer game, was almost too horrifying to process. We need to warn him, I said, reaching for my phone. Sarah caught my wrist gently. Catherine, think about this carefully. Donald won't believe you. In his mind, you're the bitter ex-wife trying to sabotage his happiness, and if Chloe realizes we're onto her, she might accelerate whatever timeline she's working on. The truth of that statement settled over me like a heavy blanket. Donald was 71 years old, in good health, but not immune to the vulnerabilities that came with age. If Chloe was planning something, a direct confrontation might push her to act sooner rather than later. What do we do? I asked, feeling more helpless than I had since this whole nightmare began. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. We investigate. Quietly. Chloe Stevens, or Peterson, or whatever her real name is, has been very careful, but nobody's perfect. If she's done this before, there will be other victims. Other families who might have questions about what happened to their loved ones. She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. I'm going to hire a private investigator, someone discreet who can dig into her past without alerting her. In the meantime, you need to be very careful about what you do and say. If she's watching for any signs that you're onto her, she could hurt Donald, I finished, or make you disappear from his life even more completely than she already has. I left Sarah's office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months, but also with a terror that kept me awake at night. As I drove through the familiar streets of the town where I'd lived for 40 years, everything looked different now. Every elderly couple I saw made me wonder if they were safe, if they knew the signs to watch for, if they had someone looking out for them. Back in my apartment, I spread the documents Sarah had given me across my dining table. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Chloe's first husband, James Peterson, had been 47 when they married, not elderly, but old enough to have accumulated assets. The second husband, Robert Stevens, had been 68. Now Donald at 71. Each marriage had lasted approximately 2 years before the husband's death. Each time, Chloe had been the grieving widow, the devoted wife who'd cared for her husband through his final decline. Each time, there had been adult children who'd questioned the circumstances but couldn't prove anything. My phone rang, startling me from my dark thoughts. The caller ID showed my daughter's name, and for a moment I considered not answering. Lisa's calls had become increasingly difficult since the divorce, full of gentle suggestions that I get help and consider counseling. Hi, sweetheart, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom, I heard about the wedding. Lisa's voice was carefully neutral. How are you handling this? I wanted to tell her everything. About Chloe's past, about the financial irregularities, about the pattern of behavior that suggested her father was in terrible danger. But Sarah's warning echoed in my mind. I'm managing, I said instead. Actually, I'm thinking of attending. There was a long pause. Mom, are you sure that's a good idea? It might be. Difficult for you to see Dad happy with someone else. Happy. If only she knew how wrong that word was. I think it's important that I go, Lisa. To show that I'm not some bitter old woman hiding away in shame. Okay, she said slowly. But maybe you should bring someone with you, for support. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. You know what, honey? I think that's a wonderful idea. After we hung up, I sat staring at the wedding invitation still propped against my fruit bowl. Chloe expected me to come alone, broken, desperate for closure. She had no idea what was really coming for her. The investigation would take time, but the wedding was in 10 days. And suddenly, I had a plan. The private investigator Sarah had hired was a woman named Detective Rita Morales, recently retired from the police force. She had the kind of weathered face that suggested she'd seen everything, and when she laid out her findings in Sarah's office 5 days before the wedding, I realized I'd only scratched the surface of Chloe's deception. Mrs. Harrison, Rita said, opening a thick folder. Your instincts were right. Chloe Stevens has been very busy, and she's more dangerous than we initially thought. She placed a photograph on the desk. It showed a modest headstone in what looked like a small-town cemetery. James Peterson, age 49, died 18 months into his marriage to Chloe from what the coroner ruled was a heart attack brought on by medication interaction. My stomach clenched. Medication interaction? James had been taking blood pressure medication for years with no problems, but in the weeks before his death, his prescription was changed twice. The pharmacy records show that Chloe picked up both prescriptions, claiming James was too ill to come in himself. Rita pulled out another photo. Robert Stevens, age 70, died 2.5 years into his marriage to Chloe. Also ruled natural causes, specifically complications from a stroke. But here's what's interesting. Robert's daughter told me her father had been in perfect health until the last 6 months of his life. She said he'd become increasingly confused, paranoid, and physically weak. The similarities to what I'd experienced during my recovery were chilling. She was poisoning them. I can't prove that, Rita said carefully. But the pattern is consistent. Both men experienced dramatic health declines in their final months. Both became isolated from their adult children, who were painted as greedy and uncaring. And both changed their wills shortly before their deaths, leaving everything to their devoted young wife. Sarah leaned forward. Rita, what about the medical records Chloe provided? The documentation of their mental decline? Rita's expression darkened. That's where it gets really interesting. I tracked down the doctor who allegedly treated Robert Stevens during his final months. Dr. Marcus Webb. He died in a car accident 3 months after Robert's death. The room fell silent, except for the sound of my own rapid breathing. That can't be a coincidence. It gets worse, Rita continued. I found Dr. Webb's former nurse, a woman named Patricia Mills. She's terrified, Catherine. Absolutely terrified. It took me 3 visits before she'd even talk to me, and only then because I convinced her that more lives might be at stake. Rita pulled out a small digital recorder. Patricia told me that in the months before Dr. Webb's death, he'd been acting strangely. Paranoid, she called it. He'd started questioning some of his patient records, particularly those involving elderly patients with young caregivers. She said he'd become convinced that someone was falsifying medical documents using his credentials. My hands were shaking again. What happened to him? Single car accident on a clear day on a road he'd driven thousands of times. No skid marks, no apparent mechanical failure. The police ruled it an accident, but Patricia doesn't think so. She said Dr. Webb had called her the night before he died, telling her he'd figured out how someone was creating false medical histories, and he was going to report it to the medical board. Sarah was taking notes furiously. So, Chloe has been using a deceased doctor's credentials to create fake medical records documenting her husband's mental decline. Records that would support her claims in probate court if anyone contested the wills. That's my theory, Rita said. And there's more. I've been tracking Chloe's movements over the past 5 years. She doesn't just randomly target wealthy older men. She researches them. Extensively. Rita spread out a series of documents. Before she married Robert Stevens, she volunteered at the senior center where he played bridge twice a week. Before James Peterson, she worked part-time at the pharmacy where he filled his prescriptions. She studies these men, learns their routines, their vulnerabilities, their family dynamics. Then she inserts herself into their lives in a way that seems natural and helpful. I thought about how Chloe had appeared in our lives. She said she specialized in post-surgical recovery care, that she'd worked with hip fracture patients before. I checked with the nursing registry. Chloe Stevens has never been licensed as a nursing assistant in this state or any other. Those references she provided? 2 of them were from facilities that don't exist. The third was from a nursing home that closed down 4 years ago. The scope of the deception was staggering. How did we not catch this? Sarah answered quietly. Because when you're vulnerable and in pain, you want to believe that help has arrived. And Chloe is very good at becoming exactly what people need her to be. Rita leaned back in her chair. There's something else, Catherine. Something that changes everything. She pulled out another photograph, this one showing a young woman with dark hair who looked vaguely familiar. This is Christina Stevens. She's 17 years old, and she's Chloe's daughter. My breath caught. Daughter? Chloe has been supporting this girl since she was born. Private school, expensive clothes, college prep courses. Christina has no idea what her mother does for a living. As far as she knows, Chloe works in healthcare consulting and travels frequently for work. The implications hit me like a physical blow. She's been killing people to pay for her daughter's education. It appears so. And Catherine, there's something else you need to know. Christina Stevens was accepted to Harvard University this fall. Full tuition and expenses will run about $80,000 per year for 4 years. I did the math quickly. $320,000. Plus graduate school if she continues. Chloe needs a significant financial windfall soon, or her daughter's future is in jeopardy. Rita closed the folder and looked directly at me. Donald Harrison has assets worth approximately $400,000, plus a life insurance policy worth $200,000. That's more than enough to secure Christina's education and set Chloe up for life. The wedding was in 5 days. If Chloe followed her usual pattern, Donald had maybe 2 years left to live, 2 years of gradual decline, increasing isolation, and systematic poisoning disguised as loving care. We have to stop her, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. Rita nodded. But we need proof. Real, concrete evidence that will hold up in court. The circumstantial evidence is compelling, but it's not enough to convict her of murder. Sarah was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling the district attorney's office. They need to know what we found. Wait, Rita said, holding up a hand. If we go to the police now, Chloe will disappear. She's done it before. When James Peterson's family started asking too many questions, she moved to another state and became someone else. We might save Donald, but we'll never get justice for her other victims. I stared out Sarah's office window at the busy street below, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary lives. None of them knew they were living in a world where predators like Chloe existed, where love could be weaponized and trust could be fatal. What are you suggesting? I asked. Rita's smile was cold and determined. I'm suggesting we give Chloe exactly what she wants. A wedding day she'll never forget. The plan that emerged over the next hour was risky, possibly illegal, and absolutely terrifying. But it was also the only way to protect Donald and prevent Chloe from finding another victim. As I left Sarah's office, clutching the evidence folder against my chest, I thought about the navy blue dress hanging in my closet. I'd planned to wear it as a show of strength, a way to prove that Catherine Harrison couldn't be broken. Now I would wear it as armor for the battle that would determine not just my future, but Donald's life itself. 2 days before the wedding, Rita called with news that changed everything I thought I knew about Chloe's plan. Catherine, you need to sit down for this, she said, her voice tight with urgency. I've been monitoring Chloe's communications, and what I found is worse than we imagined. I was in my kitchen, mechanically preparing a cup of tea I didn't want, when her words stopped me cold. What do you mean monitoring her communications? She's been sloppy with her phone security. I managed to access her text messages and email through some, let's call them unconventional methods. Catherine, she's not planning to wait 2 years. The timeline has been accelerated. My hand started trembling so violently I had to set down the teapot. What are you saying? I found messages between Chloe and someone she calls D. I believe it's a doctor, probably another corrupt medical professional she's worked with before. They've been discussing Donald's treatment plan for after the honeymoon. Rita's voice became even more grim. Catherine, they're planning to induce a stroke within the first month of marriage. Something about a blood thinner interaction that would look completely natural for a man his age. The room spun around me. I gripped the kitchen counter, fighting off waves of nausea. A month? But the honeymoon is next week. There's more. I also found correspondence with a funeral home. Pre-arrangements, paid in advance. And Catherine, she's already contacted a probate attorney about expediting the will process. I sank into my chair, the full horror of Chloe's efficiency washing over me. She wasn't just a predator, she was a methodical killer who had turned murder into a business model. "We have to warn him now," I said, reaching for my phone. "Wait, there's something else you need to know first." Rita's voice became even more serious. "I found messages between Chloe and her daughter Christina. Catherine, the girl knows. Knows what? Everything. Christina isn't an innocent beneficiary of her mother's crimes. She's an active participant. The Harvard acceptance, the private school, all of it has been funded by blood money, and she's fully aware of how her mother earns their lifestyle." I felt like I was drowning. The young woman I'd occasionally seen in photos on Chloe's phone, the teenager I'd pitied for having such a manipulative mother, was actually her accomplice. Rita continued reading from what must have been printed messages. "Christina wrote to her mother last week. 'Mom, are you sure the old man won't suffer too much? I know it's necessary, but I don't want him to be in pain.' And Chloe's response was, 'Don't worry, sweetie. It will be quick and peaceful. He won't even know what's happening.'" The casual cruelty in those words, the way they discussed Donald's murder like a routine business transaction, made me physically sick. I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. When I returned, Rita was still on the line. "Catherine, are you okay?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm not okay. How can people like this exist? How can a mother raise her daughter to be part of something so evil?" I've been asking myself the same question. But here's what we know now. This isn't just about stopping Chloe. Christina is planning to continue her mother's work. I found college application essays on her laptop. She's planning to major in nursing with a specialization in geriatric care. The next generation of predators being trained from childhood. Rita, we can't let this continue. I agree. But Catherine, what I'm about to tell you next is going to be the hardest part. Rita's voice became very gentle. "I found evidence that suggests you weren't Chloe's first practice run." "What do you mean?" "Before she targeted Donald, she spent 6 months working for an elderly woman named Eleanor Craftsman. Eleanor died of what was ruled a medication overdose, accidental according to the coroner. But her nephew told me Eleanor had been in perfect health until Chloe started helping with her medications. My blood went cold. She was testing her methods. That's what I think. Eleanor had no significant assets, no large life insurance policy, but she was alone, vulnerable, and trusting. The perfect subject for Chloe to refine her techniques before targeting someone worth killing for. I thought about all the times Chloe had organized my medications, how concerned she'd seemed about my recovery, how she'd insisted on handling all my prescriptions personally. She was practicing on me, too. I believe so. Your hip surgery recovery should have taken 6 to 8 weeks. Instead, you were bedridden for months, experiencing confusion, memory problems, and physical weakness that didn't match your actual injury. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. My extended recovery hadn't been due to complications from the surgery. It had been due to whatever Chloe was slipping into my medications. She'd been experimenting, learning how to induce symptoms that would support her narrative of declining mental capacity. Rita, if I hadn't gotten suspicious, if I hadn't stopped taking the medications she prepared for me, you'd probably be dead by now, Rita said bluntly, which would have left Donald even more isolated and dependent on her. I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by the modest possessions that represented all I had left of my former life, and realized how close I'd come to losing everything, not just my marriage and my home, but my life itself. "What's our next move?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "The wedding is in 2 days. We need irrefutable evidence that will not only stop Chloe, but ensure both she and Christina face justice for their crimes. I have a plan, but it's going to require you to do something extremely dangerous." Rita outlined her strategy, and with each detail, I felt my resolve strengthen. The plan would put me in direct contact with Chloe, potentially putting my life at risk, but it was the only way to get the evidence we needed to save Donald and prevent future victims. "Catherine, I need you to understand something," Rita said as she finished explaining. "If this goes wrong, if Chloe realizes what we're doing, She won't hesitate to eliminate you as a threat. Are you prepared for that risk? I thought about Donald, probably at home right now, excitedly planning his honeymoon while his bride-to-be planned his murder. I thought about Eleanor Craftsman, dying alone and confused while her killer posed as a caring helper. I thought about James Peterson and Robert Stevens, and all the future victims who would suffer if Chloe and Christina were allowed to continue their deadly work. Yes, I said, my voice strong and certain. I'm prepared. That evening, I called Donald's number for the first time since our divorce was finalized. He answered on the third ring, his voice wary. Catherine? Is everything all right? Hello, Donald. I was wondering if I could speak with Chloe. I have something I'd like to give her before the wedding. A family heirloom that I think she'd appreciate. There was a pause. Then Donald's voice became warmer. Catherine, that's very generous of you. I'm sure Chloe would be touched. Would you like to come by tomorrow evening? She's been hoping you two could make peace before the wedding. That would be perfect, I said, my heart pounding. I'll see you both tomorrow night. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. In less than 24 hours, I would be face to face with the woman who had systematically destroyed my life and was planning to murder my ex-husband. The woman who had trained her daughter to follow in her footsteps. Tomorrow night, one way or another, this nightmare would finally end. The morning of the wedding, I woke with the kind of clarity that comes only in moments of absolute purpose. The navy blue dress hung on my closet door, pressed and ready, but it was the small recording device Rita had given me that held my attention. Smaller than a button, it was designed to capture everything that happened in the next few hours. My meeting with Chloe the night before had gone exactly as Rita predicted. Sitting in what used to be my living room, watching my replacement play the perfect hostess, I'd listened to her gush about the wedding plans while Donald beamed beside her like a man half his age. Catherine, I'm so glad you came, Chloe had said, her smile as radiant as ever. Donald told me you had something for me? I'd presented her with my grandmother's pearl necklace, not because I wanted her to have it, but because Rita needed me to establish a connection, a reason to be close to her during the ceremony. These have been in my family for 3 generations, I'd told her, fastening the clasp around her neck, while Rita's tiny camera, hidden in the pendant I wore, recorded every moment. I want you to wear them tomorrow, for luck. Chloe's eyes had filled with crocodile tears. Catherine, this is too generous. After everything that's happened between us. We're going to be family soon, I'd said, hating every word. I want us to start fresh. The hug she'd given me felt like embracing a snake, but it had served its purpose. The microtransmitter Rita had given me was now safely attached to the inside of the pearl necklace's clasp, where it would record every conversation Chloe had throughout her wedding day. Now, standing in the parking lot of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, I watched the early guests arrive. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock, followed by a reception at the country club. Chloe had spared no expense, all of it coming from money that should have been mine. My daughter Lisa arrived just as I'd hoped, flying in from Seattle at my request. She looked concerned as she approached, probably expecting to find me in emotional ruins. Mom, are you sure you're okay with this? She asked, studying my composed expression with confusion. I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than I've been in months, actually. Lisa raised an eyebrow. You seem different, stronger, somehow. If only she knew. I've had time to process everything, Lisa, to understand what really happened to our family. We entered the church together, and I was gratified to see several heads turn our way. Let them look. Let them see that Catherine Harrison hadn't been broken by this experience. The church was decorated with white roses and baby's breath. Simple, elegant, expensive. Donald stood at the altar in his best suit, looking happier than I'd seen him in years. My heart ached for him, knowing he had no idea how much danger he was in. I spotted Christina Stevens in the 3rd row, looking every inch the proud daughter in a pale pink dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She caught my eye and smiled sweetly, the perfect picture of innocence. The organ music swelled, and everyone rose as Chloe appeared at the back of the church. She was breathtaking in white silk and lace, my grandmother's pearls gleaming at her throat. For a moment, I almost forgot that I was looking at a calculating killer who had murdered at least 3 people. As she walked down the aisle, I activated the recording device hidden in my purse. Everything that happened from this moment forward would be captured, stored as evidence of what was about to unfold. The ceremony proceeded normally until Pastor Williams reached the traditional words. If anyone knows of any reason why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever, hold your peace. The church fell silent. This was it. The moment Chloe expected to pass without incident, the final step in claiming her victim. I stood up. The collective gasp from the congregation was audible. Donald's face went white. Chloe's perfect composure cracked just slightly, though she recovered quickly. "I object," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. "And I have evidence that this marriage would be fraudulent." Pastor Williams looked bewildered. "Mrs. Harrison, this is most unusual." "I apologize, Pastor, but I have information that concerns Mr. Harrison's safety." I stepped into the aisle, holding up a manila envelope. "Chloe Stevens is not who she claims to be." Chloe's voice was steady, but I caught the flash of fury in her eyes. "Catherine, you're making a scene." "Donald, please make her stop." But Donald was staring at me with growing alarm. Whatever he saw in my expression was clearly troubling him. "What kind of evidence?" he asked quietly. I walked toward the altar, every eye in the church following me. "Evidence that the woman you're about to marry has been married twice before, and both of her previous husbands died under suspicious circumstances." The murmur that ran through the congregation was like a wave. Chloe's face had gone pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "That's ridiculous," she said. "Donald, she's lying. She can't stand to see you happy." "Her real name is Chloe Peterson," I continued, opening the envelope. "Her first husband, James Peterson, died from a medication interaction 18 months into their marriage. Her second husband, Robert Stevens, died from stroke complications 2.5 years into their marriage. Both men left her as their sole beneficiary." I pulled out the photographs Rita had gathered. Both men experienced the same pattern of decline: confusion, memory loss, physical weakness. The same symptoms I experienced during my recovery, when Chloe was caring for me. Donald's face was ashen now. "Catherine, what are you saying?" "I'm saying she's a killer, Donald. And you're next." The explosion of voices was immediate. Some people shouted that I was crazy. Others demanded to know if what I was saying was true. Through it all, Chloe stood frozen at the altar, her perfect wedding dissolving into chaos around her. But it was Christina's reaction that told me everything. The girl had gone white as paper and was frantically typing on her phone. Rita had been right. She was warning someone, probably the mysterious Dr. D, who had been helping plan Donald's murder. Pastor Williams was trying to restore order when Detective Martinez, Rita's former partner, appeared at the back of the church. Rita had promised that backup would be in place, and seeing him there filled me with relief. "Ladies and gentlemen," Detective Martinez called out, his voice cutting through the noise, "I'm going to need everyone to remain calm. We have some questions for Ms. Stevens." Chloe finally spoke, her voice shaking with rage. "This is harassment. That woman is mentally unstable. Donald, tell them about her condition, about how confused she gets." But Donald was backing away from her, horror dawning on his face. "The medications," he whispered. "All those times you said Catherine was having episodes. You were drugging her." "Of course not," Chloe protested, but her voice lacked conviction now. "Donald, please. You know me. You know I would never hurt anyone." "Do I?" Donald asked, his voice breaking. "Because right now, I don't know you at all." Detective Martinez approached the altar. "Ms. Stevens, we need to discuss some irregularities we've found regarding your previous marriages, and we have some questions about a Dr. Marcus Webb." At the mention of the doctor's name, Chloe's composure finally shattered completely. She spun toward Christina, who was still frantically texting. "Christina, stop," she snapped. "Don't say anything to anyone." But it was too late. Rita appeared from the side chapel where she'd been monitoring Christina's communications. "Christina Stevens, you're under arrest as an accessory to conspiracy to commit murder." The teenager's scream of rage was nothing like the sweet, innocent girl she'd pretended to be. "You can't prove anything. We were careful." "Actually," Rita said, holding up a phone, "you've been extremely careless. Did you know that planning someone's murder via text message is still considered conspiracy, even if you haven't carried it out yet?" As the police placed handcuffs on both Chloe and Christina, I felt a strange sense of anticlimax. After months of fear, manipulation, and preparation, it was over. The woman who had destroyed my marriage and planned to murder my ex-husband was finally facing justice. Donald walked slowly toward me, his face a mixture of gratitude and shame. "Catherine, How did you know?" "Because I never stopped loving you," I said simply. "Even when I hated what you'd done to us, I couldn't let her kill you." The church was in chaos, guests filing out in shocked clusters, everyone talking at once about what they'd witnessed. But in the midst of it all, Donald reached out and took my hand. "Can you ever forgive me?" he asked, tears streaming down his face. I looked at him, this man I'd loved for 37 years, who'd been so thoroughly manipulated that he'd thrown away our entire life together. Then I looked at Chloe being led away in handcuffs, her white dress a mockery of everything she'd pretended to be. "We'll see," I said. "We'll see." 6 months after the wedding that never was, I sat in a courtroom watching Chloe Peterson receive 3 consecutive life sentences for the murders of James Peterson, Robert Stevens, and Eleanor Craftsman. The evidence Rita had gathered, combined with Christina's desperate attempts to destroy evidence that actually preserved it, had built an airtight case. Detective Martinez had been right about the text messages. Christina's panicked communications during the wedding had led police directly to Dr. David Chen, a disgraced physician who had been falsifying medical records and providing lethal drug combinations to Chloe for the past 4 years. His arrest had unraveled an entire network of medical fraud and elder abuse. Christina received 15 years as part of a plea agreement, during which she'd testified against her mother with a cold detachment that chilled everyone in the courtroom. Even facing prison, she showed no remorse for the lives they'd taken or planned to take. The defendant showed a complete disregard for human life, Judge Patricia Warren said as she pronounced Chloe's sentence. She turned caregiving into a weapon, exploiting the trust of vulnerable individuals for personal gain. This court finds that the heinous nature of these crimes warrants the maximum penalty under law. Chloe had stared straight ahead throughout the sentencing, showing no emotion, but as the bailiff led her away, she'd turned to look directly at me. The hatred in her eyes was pure and venomous, but it no longer frightened me. She had no power over anyone anymore. After the trial, Donald and I had walked to our cars together. The past 6 months had been a slow, careful process of rebuilding trust. He'd moved out of our former home. He couldn't bear to live there anymore, and into a small apartment across town. We met for coffee twice a week, gradually piecing together the fragments of our relationship. "I keep thinking about how close I came," he'd said that day, his voice still shaky months after learning the truth. "She had it all planned out, Catherine. The honeymoon in Cabo, the quiet death from a stroke, the grieving widow routine. If you hadn't stopped her." "But I did stop her," I'd reminded him. "That's what matters now." The hardest part hadn't been forgiving Donald. It had been watching him forgive himself. The shame of how completely he'd been manipulated, how thoroughly he'd abandoned our marriage for a lie, had nearly destroyed him. Only therapy and time had begun to heal those wounds. We weren't rushing back into anything romantic. Too much damage had been done for that to be simple or easy. But we were rebuilding a friendship based on honesty, instead of the comfortable assumptions that had made us vulnerable to Chloe's manipulation. Today, I was sitting in my small apartment, the same one I'd moved to after the divorce, but it felt different now. It wasn't a place of exile anymore. It was home, chosen and claimed by my own decisions. Lisa had called that morning from Seattle, her voice bright with news. "Mom, I got the promotion. Senior partner. Can you believe it?" "I can absolutely believe it," I'd told her, pride swelling in my chest. "You've worked incredibly hard for this. I've been thinking about what you went through," she'd said, her voice becoming more serious. "How you fought for Dad even after everything that happened. I don't think I understood before how strong you really are. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. When I opened it, I found Rita standing there with a bottle of champagne and a broad smile. "We need to celebrate," she announced, pushing past me into the apartment. "The Patterson case just closed. Remember Mrs. Patterson, the woman whose nephew thought she was being scammed by her caregiver?" I nodded. Rita had started her own private investigation business after the Chloe case, specializing in elder abuse and fraud. The Patterson case had been her third successful intervention in as many months. "Turns out you were right to be suspicious," Rita continued, popping the cork on the champagne. "The caregiver was stealing from her and had been gradually increasing her medication to keep her compliant. We caught her before any permanent damage was done." I accepted the glass Rita poured for me, marveling at how much my life had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a broken, isolated woman convinced that I was losing my mind. Now I was part of a network of people working to protect vulnerable seniors from predators like Chloe. "Rita, I've been thinking about something," I said, settling into my favorite chair. "What if we formalized this? Not just reactive investigations, but proactive education." Rita raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean workshops for seniors and their families. Warning signs to watch for, red flags that might indicate financial or medical abuse, resources for people who suspect something is wrong but don't know how to proceed." Rita's eyes lit up. "Catherine, that's brilliant. You could speak from personal experience, someone who survived what these predators do and can help others recognize the patterns." The idea had been growing in my mind for weeks. Every day, Rita told me about new cases, new vulnerable people being targeted by sophisticated criminals who exploited trust and compassion. If sharing my story could prevent even one person from going through what I'd experienced, it would be worth the discomfort of reliving those dark months. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Donald. "Coffee tomorrow? I have something I want to discuss with you." I showed the message to Rita, who grinned. "Things are progressing well there, I take it?" "Slowly," I admitted. "But honestly, I'm not sure I want to go back to being married. I've learned to like my independence." Rita nodded approvingly. "You've earned the right to choose your own terms, Catherine. Don't let anyone pressure you into anything that doesn't feel right." As evening fell, I found myself thinking about the woman I'd been a year ago, trusting to a fault, dependent on others for validation, willing to doubt my own perceptions rather than confront uncomfortable truths. That woman felt like a stranger now. The Catherine who had stood up in that church and faced down a killer was someone I was still getting to know. She was braver than I'd ever imagined I could be, more resilient than I'd given myself credit for. She was someone who had looked evil in the face and refused to let it win. The next morning, I met Donald at our usual coffee shop downtown. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his wedding ring, the one from our marriage that he'd never stopped wearing, even during his engagement to Chloe. "Catherine, I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice hesitant. "About us, about what happened, about what I want for the rest of my life." I sipped my latte and waited, no longer anxious about these conversations the way I'd been in the beginning. "I know I have no right to ask this," he continued, "but I was wondering, would you consider trying again? Not rushing into anything, just dating, like we're getting to know each other for the first time." I studied his face, seeing the hope and fear warring in his expression. This was the man I'd loved for most of my adult life, who had shared my dreams and built a life with me that had been torn apart by a skillful predator. "Donald," I said gently, "I need you to understand something. I'm not the same woman you married 37 years ago. I'm not even the same woman you divorced 8 months ago. What I've been through has changed me." His face fell slightly, but he nodded. "I understand. I just thought—" "I'm not finished," I interrupted, smiling at his expression. "I'm different now, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe the woman I am now is someone who won't ignore warning signs or doubt her own instincts. Someone who won't sacrifice her independence for the comfort of being taken care of." Donald straightened, a spark of hope returning to his eyes. "So here's what I'm willing to offer," I continued. "We can date. We can spend time together and see if we still enjoy each other's company. But I'm keeping my apartment, my independence, and my new life. If you can accept that version of me, Then yes, we can try again. The smile that spread across Donald's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Catherine Harrison, would you do me the honor of being my girlfriend? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Yes, Donald Harrison. I believe I would like that very much. As I walked home that afternoon, passing the church where Chloe's wedding had been interrupted, I reflected on the strange turns life can take. A year ago, I had been a victim, broken and isolated. Now I was a survivor, with a purpose and a future entirely of my own making. Chloe Peterson had intended to destroy me, to use me as practice for her ultimate goal of murdering Donald. Instead, she had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life, the knowledge that I was stronger, braver, and more resilient than I had ever dreamed possible. In the end, that was a victory worth more than any revenge. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.